Welcome to London Futurists, where we look at the most important scenarios for the 2020s and beyond. Almost every time I have discussions with people about the future, the subject comes back to the future of education. It's a widespread observation that our educational systems are not really doing the best thing to prepare people for the very fast changing world of today and tomorrow. To discuss options for doing education differently, I'm very pleased to be joined by David Giron, who is from Codam, the Coding Academy in Amsterdam. David, welcome to the call, and perhaps you can introduce yourself and say a bit about your background.
Hello, David. Thank you very much for having me for this session. So my name is indeed David Giron. As you can probably hear already, I'm French, and my journey in education started in France about 15 years ago now. First, as a student, I was a computer science student from the French school Epitech. I studied there for 5 years, eventually graduating a master's degree. And during my studies there, that's when I realized that I was really into education, that I wanted to work in that field. And it all started when I joined the assistant team of one of my favorite teacher over there. And one thing led to another, and eventually I became the teacher myself for the very same topic. And I took the lead of this assistant team that was there at the time. And I did that. I've been teaching C++ and functional programming there in that school for 5 years. And during the last year there, I also became vice head of studies at that school. So it allowed me to go one step further into helping setting up the educational model there in its implementation. But that was also the year when a lot of things changed for me, because that was 2013, and that was the year when 42 was founded, the French school 42. So I guess we're going to discuss a lot about that school during this session. And I stayed there as the head of studies for 5 years. So I was heavily involved into designing the curriculum and implementing it. Until eventually I had the opportunity last year to join the Dutch team, licensing the curriculum for the school Codam as the managing director.
Thanks so much for bringing us up to date. So for those who haven't heard about what's different with 42, maybe you can explain what's been accomplished by it and why people should pay more attention to it.
Well, 42 is the result of, well, on our side, around 20 years of study and tries out regarding new models of education. We started with the idea that education as it is right now is not sufficient enough. I think the era of the teacher teaching to a class for a specific topic for a specific year is behind us, and it doesn't address, I would say, the needs of nowadays world. So eventually we came with the idea that education should have the student at the very center of it and get rid of everything that would be in the way. We came up with this principle of peer learning, where the students would learn from each other. That was the core idea that we wanted to apply for this educational model. And from there, well, a lot of beautiful things happened. We completely got rid of the idea of pushing knowledge towards the students. We didn't want that at all. We wanted learning to be an experience for the students, and wanted to make sure that anything that they would learn for good. What I mean exactly here is that when you listen to a teacher, and I've been a teacher myself, so I can really speak firsthand, students tend to believe what the teacher will say, like it's the word of God or something like that, and never really question it. And I think it's a problem, because I might be wrong, I might be outdated, and also the way I teach might not be suitable for everyone in the room. But if you find a way so the student is able to acquire the knowledge by themselves, then you completely change the game, because you make sure that the students has been engaged in actually acquiring that that bit of knowledge. So that was a bit ambitious, but eventually it turned out great. We implemented a curriculum that is really hands-on, where the students will learn programming all together. So in a nutshell, it's a set of little challenges. We call them projects that are very diverse in size. But the point is that every time the students have no clue whatsoever how to solve the problem beforehand. And identifying and acquiring the bits of knowledge necessary to solve the project is a full part of this journey. That's the learning experience. And thanks to this process, we can really make sure that since the student has been engaged from the beginning into learning what is necessary, they will actually remember it. So that's in a nutshell how the principle works. There is one core idea that I often talk about during conferences and talk. It's the idea of learning to learn. I think if we should remember one thing about this educational model, it's this very idea. We want to make sure that the students will be able to learn by themselves, because trying to teach specific language, specific technology at a certain point in time is doomed to fail. From my point of view, the example I always use with that is consider the phones that we've been using 20 years ago. From top of my mind, it was something like the Nokia 3310. And as of today, 20 years later only, we have these beautiful smartphones all in our pockets. And in the span of these 20 years, technology has been evolved a lot. And I have no way to predict for sure how my phone will look like in 20 years from now. So what I'm trying to illustrate here is that if I try to teach a specific technology to develop on my phone, it is very likely to be outdated when my students will eventually hit the market or be in the, let's say, 10 years after they graduated in their career. However, what I can do is to make sure that I prep them in a specific way that will allow them to stay relevant at that time. That if in their studies, since day one, they learn the process of learning, that they're able to reach for the documentation, to look for the sources, to be able to acquire the knowledge necessary on the topic, then that's something they will retain, and that they will bring with them during all their career. So this way, I'm sure that in 20 years from now, if a new technology arises, then they will be ready. For them, it will be just like during their studies. Okay, let's reach for the documentation and look into it. So this learning to learn idea is really crucial to this educational model.
Just to confirm, what's the ratio of teachers to students and compared to other universities and similar schools? How many teachers do you have there actually teaching or marking students' work?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I will answer it really clearly. None whatsoever. We have exactly 0 teachers in the school. We have a little bit of an educational staff here in Codam. It's 1 person. Her name is Catherine Madinier. She is our head of studies. And in 42, it's almost the same. The team is slightly larger because the school is slightly larger. But the point is that these people, they do not teach or anything. They just make sure that the curriculum is available, is in good shape, that it's up to date, that it's working. But there is no transfer of knowledge, anything like that. And then your second question was really relevant. It was, if you don't have any teaching staff whatsoever, how can you mark the students? How can you evaluate them? Well, we addressed that problem with what we call a peer evaluation. We have our students evaluate each other. It's fairly close to what you could find in the academic world with peer reviewing articles or things like that. You just submit your work to your peers, and eventually they will tell you if it works or not. So obviously there is a frame to it here. For instance, the staff wrote some marking scales, okay, for every project available. And then some students will be randomly selected in the group to evaluate a peer that is done with a project, a peer or a team of peers who are done with a project. And to ensure that it is a fair grading, each project is going to be marked between 3 and 5 times, depends on the scale of the project. But the point is that with 5 peer reviews, we can be sure that eventually the final mark will be fair. We can detect some noise in the list of marks and things like that. So that's how we do it.
And if students are working in teams, how can it be clear whether students have been contributing to the team or they've just been coasting along?
Oh, that's completely up to them to figure out. For me, I want it to be an experience, a learning experience, and it's much more than just the hard skills of programming. There are lots of soft skills involved, and obviously the team dynamic is one of them that they experience fairly soon. It's actually pretty organic as an answer. But the thing is that if you have one team member who does nothing for a project, when it can be okay for one project, but eventually the second time you say, something is off with that person. And the thing is, shows that eventually the team will drop the person because that person is not reliable. So the team will self-tame itself, if I may say.
What's the evidence that this is actually working, that it's producing people who are seen as good employees, good citizens?
The feedback of the companies. So far, I would say that it is my most important KPI. The only reason why students would attend Codam or 42 in the first place is to get a job. So for me, the education works if the company is eventually satisfied with the students. And I can't talk yet with Codam because we are newly created. It's only been 10 months, 11 months as of today. But with 42, since 2013, we had a tremendous amount of feedback from companies. And I remember that 98% of them had very positive feedback on the students. So I think in itself that's a proof that the system works.
So just talk about the history. You said it was set up in 2013 in Paris, and how has it grown from there to other parts of the world?
Well, it all started with the idea of having this one school in Paris for the French students. And something we did not foresee at the time was the huge success that it was going to be. And it was actually such a big success that eventually the founder of the school decided to open a second one in the Silicon Valley near San Francisco, a second 42 school over there. And from there, it basically snowballed. What happened is that other people from around the world contacted us and asked if they could benefit from the same kind of school in their country. And we developed this licensing model that has been used ever since. So other countries can open their licensed franchise of the 42 school. Obviously, it's not the same founder, so it's founded by someone over there. Here, for instance, in the Netherlands with Codam, it's thanks to the founding of Madame Corinne Vigreux, one of the co-founders of TomTom. But it depends on every country. And thanks to this licensing agreement, we benefit from the exact same model. It's a clone of the school. Even the building itself inside, it looks like the 42 school. Everything has been designed to be a 42 school. The curriculum is exactly the same. Obviously, the education model is exactly the same. And right now, all the students from all the schools across the world are all using the same communication system. They are all together.
No, I visited Codam in summer, and since then I've tried to talk several occasions to people I know in the UK about, isn't this a great method of teaching? And often the reaction has been, well, that might work for teaching people coding, but it's not going to work in other subjects. What's your view on that?
I love that question, and that's a personal favorite. Okay, here I'm not talking as the director of Codam, it's in my own name. I would love to see the education model that we use here at Codam apply to different topics. That really is something I would like to pursue as a personal goal. There are low-hanging fruits, like for instance, math or some other kind of sciences. But the real challenge would be to try to apply it to very, very diverse topics. You name it, could be philosophy, history, arts, I don't know, but I would love to figure it out. Like really, I think the way we organize the knowledge and the challenges of the curriculum, the little projects, the way it's progressing more and more complex, but always balanced. It's like a framework that could. I have the feeling that it could be easily replicated with some other topics, and I would definitely love to be part of it.
And does this work for students of all ages? Could it work for children who are at high school or nursery, or is it just for 18-year-olds and upwards?
That's something we never tried before, so I can just answer from my own feeling. I don't have hard data to back me up. So far, I know for sure that it's working for people 18 plus and up to people the age of 50 and around. Now, when it comes to younger children, I think it could work as well. Obviously, in something reduced in scale and difficulty on some specific topics. I mean, eventually it's just creating a set of challenges that are accessible, but always a little bit too difficult. So it's not straightforward. So it's all about balance. I believe it would be possible, but I don't have any data to back me up.
So for younger children, but also for these different possible subjects, it's going to come down to people developing suitable curriculum, I guess, one of the core assets.
That's it. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. The education model is interesting in itself, but the curriculum itself is, the implementation of this model is also really interesting. As it is today, what I call the curriculum is actually a set of about 100 projects that are more or less laid out as a graph. Okay, there is an entry node, and from there are possible paths that stray away from the center node. And at the beginning, the choice is limited. You have very little choice, but still a little bit. And the more you stray away from the center, the more possibilities you have. And I think designing this graph and each projects and the branching and so on is the challenge. But if you can figure it out, I think it's easy to apply. It's possible to apply to different topics, even for young children.
So what's holding up the further application of these ideas more widely? For example, as far as I know, there's nobody doing this in the UK yet, and I think quite a few other countries there's no representation. What's the reasons?
I think we haven't met the right collaborator yet, and no more than that. As of today, the network counts 20 schools spread across 13 countries, if I'm correct. I know that for next year, we already have at least 5 in the starting block, so it's growing fast. It's just that the UK is not there yet, but I'm confident that it will be very, very soon.
So it's just a matter of step by step.
Yeah, I think at some point someone will step in the UK and will start collaborating. It hasn't happened yet.
We've talked about the signs of success in terms of the 98% positive feedback. What about the costs of running this? How does that compare to other schools?
Well, it's obviously much lower since we don't have all the teaching staff. But I would say it's the other way around. I would say that it's a really efficient model because it is really scalable. So the number of students has very little impact on the size of the staff. To give you an idea, here I run the school with 10 staff and 3 assistants from the students. And with this team, I am running a school with 240 students, 40-ish as of today. If tomorrow I had 800, it would make little difference for us. Everything has been designed to be scalable because, well, that's also part of our mission here. That's something I haven't stated yet, but one of our goals is to try to go a bit beyond the traditional educational system and to address the huge gap that there is in IT position here. There is a huge lack, sorry, not gap. But the point is that it is scalable. Right now we have a pilot. Let's say a pilot. It's one school with 240 students. Hopefully I can grow to 400 something. But I could double up that number easily and open a second school at some point. That might happen, might not depend on the result. I don't want to make false promise, but my point is that it is efficient and it is scalable and it's rather easy to deploy when you've got an experimented team.
So if somebody was a teacher in an existing university, should they regard this model from 42 as an opportunity or as a threat? Are they going to get out of the job?
Thank you for that question. That's a question I have a lot because I don't want anyone to think for a minute that I look down on teachers or teaching, because I've been a teacher myself, and no, definitely no, that's not what we're trying to do here. However, I believe that the work of a teacher should evolve, and it should not be pushing the knowledge anymore, like, let's say, teaching, the hard definition of teaching in front of someone. It should be expressing the knowledge in a shape that is usable by the students. For instance, with programming, it's straightforward. I know programming language, then I should design a set of challenges that will lead my students into learning this programming language. And you notice that I'm using the word learning, okay? I never said teaching there. So for me, teachers are the keepers or holders of some knowledge, and that they should work toward prepping this knowledge in a shape that is usable by the students to learn by themselves. So it's a shift.
So if we look ahead towards the end of the next decade, 10 years from now, 2029, what's your vision for how widely this method is being used?
In 10 years from now, well, that's just my thoughts, but I believe that the network will spread a lot, much more, and we will be in many countries across the world, and probably statistically, at least a couple countries will look into this educational model more seriously and try to open a pilot program with the local Ministry of Education or something like that. That would be my forecast. That it's difficult to have the lines move, because the education system is often a very conservative part of a country, and the people you talk to are mostly of goodwill, but the machine is so large and has so much momentum that making things in motion takes time, and having results takes even more time. So yeah, end of 20, around 29, 30, I believe that some countries might have the first pilot from the government side, I would say.
And is this method suitable for 100% of students? And I understand that not everybody is able to stay in Codam after they join. There's a filtering out process.
So no, I don't believe it's a solution for everyone. What I'm confident though is that it's suitable for the most. But I don't believe that there is a definitive answer to societal problems such as education. It's about providing an alternative. Okay, we provide a possibility of learning, of education, and I don't think we should replace in any way traditional education, and we should not block the way for further development, further new ideas to go beyond. I just want to provide an alternative for a set of people that are fit for this education. So you mentioned briefly this selection process that we have. We call it the selection piscine, from the French word piscine, that translates to swimming pool in English. The idea is that's a 4-week-long selection process where we will have the students learn the very basic of programming from absolute scratch. So it is really accessible because you don't need any kind of experience in programming whatsoever, nothing really. If you're able to use a mouse in a web browser, that's more than enough. And even if you don't, we can help you with that. And from this very ground floor, we will slowly help you build your knowledge in 4 weeks towards being a basic developer with the language C. And we will assess the way you've been engaging with it. So obviously from a technical point of view, but also in a more societal interaction point of view, where you're able to engage with the community and so on. So I don't want to say too much here because most of the criteria are a bit secret and we don't want the students to min-max the access to the school. But let's say that it's not only technical, it's also who you are as a person and how you want to contribute to the community. And eventually around a third of the candidates are selected, but it's not a hard line. It depends on the results of the group. I like to say that the only consequence to helping someone is that someone could be selected as well instead of you. So it pushes for collaboration. And eventually, with the students selected, yeah, we start the full curriculum and we started from there.
Now, we mentioned that the educational establishment in some ways is conservative. It's been quite slow to adopt new methods. I guess in a sense, they're often afraid that edutech promises more than it delivers. They've seen many promises before that new technologies is going to change things. I go back to Thomas Edison, who wrote as long ago as 1913 that the book would soon be not used in schools because there's this new technology called moving pictures, which everybody's going to use to improve education. And that didn't quite happen. So I guess people have been let down by technological promises in the past, and they are cautious. But if you are able to show more evidence that this is actually producing results, I guess more people will feel inclined to explore and find out. So if there is people here, perhaps connected with the education establishment, that want to find out more, what would be the next steps?
Well, to get in touch with us first, so we can sit around the table and discuss. That's for sure. We can bring our experience and knowledge to the pool. However, I would say that it's important that they move kind of fast now. The problem is more and more pregnant. You probably heard a lot about the companies wanting to do the digital transition and so on. For me, this is a symptom of the society realizing as a whole that something is moving and we don't want to miss the train. A personal belief is that the more we will advance in time, the more there will be a difference between the people digitally literate and the ones that are not. And for me, it will be a gap a bit like the rich and the poor, to caricature a little bit. You will be maybe put aside of society because when you consider, for instance, doing banking nowadays, everything is done online. I do my banking online. I don't know if you do it as well, but that's something that we less and less go to the bank. But that's just an example. And eventually, I believe that traditional banking with an office and going there to meet with someone will be something of the past. That's just an instance. The point I'm wanting to make here is that eventually some people will not be able to function correctly in the society because of this. So what can we do about it? Well, we can make sure that this digitalization is available and accessible to the broadest audience as possible. And for that, you need to make some rather radical decisions. For instance, here at Codam, all the schools of the network, one of the ground ideas are that the school must be accessible and available to the broadest. And the way we implement that, for instance, is that, well, I mentioned that already, but we don't require any kind of experience or diploma or whatever. Actually, the only rule to access our education is to be 18 at least. The second thing is that our schools are completely tuition free. And that I would like to emphasize a bit. The students don't pay anything at any time. Not before, not during, not after the education, as it's trending a lot in the US right now. No, nothing. It is genuinely completely free. So that way we can make sure that anyone can access it without an economic issue. But there's more to it because each time you consider a free product, well, if it's free, you probably are the product. And one thing that is certain is that here our students are not a product in any way. We go as far not even owning any intellectual property of what the students do there, any code they write, they own. Should they create a structure, an organization, a company, even they own it, we don't claim anything regarding that. Nothing. So it's it's really an opportunity for the people to size, and we just want to make it available. But we go even further. For instance, our building is accessible to all of our students 24/7. We never close. So that means that the school is adapting to the students and not the other way around, when you could have a course at 9 in the morning, but the second one at 10, and so on and so on. Yeah, no, the school is always open and available for our students. So these are ideas that are pretty radical, I admit, and it's not always easy to implement, because you need to have the funding, you need to have the building, you have to have the team, and so on. But I think it should be an inspiration if the governments or the institutions want to actually step in and make the move. If we want to transform the society and make it more digital, we have to mean it and not just organize talks and conferences. Oh, I hear a lot of these, but we need to act, to move.
Move fast.
Yeah, and do it for real.
And just in case people are wondering, if the attendance is free, how is everything paid for? And I think you've explained this already, but let's just make it clear.
I can explain, at least for France and the Netherlands. In both cases, it's a foundation that supports the school. And in France, it's the entrepreneur, Mr. Xavier Niel, who is privately founding this school. So it's not his company's money, it's his own personal money that he wants to use to found these two schools in Paris and in San Francisco. And here in the Netherlands, it's exactly the same model. But it's not Mr. Xavier Niel, it's David Giron, one of the co-founders of TomTom, and she's also privately founding the school. When I mentioned that it was free, that we don't own intellectual property and so on, it goes as far as we are not even bound in any way to the companies owned by these founders. 42 is not bound to Iliad or Free. Here, Codam is not bound to TomTom. We just happen to have the same founder, the same parents.
So in a way, it's similar to what people in the past, like Andrew Carnegie, did with his money that he'd earned through his own business life. He funded huge numbers of libraries around the world to boost educational possibilities at the time. And more recently, Bill Gates has put a great deal of his own money into healthcare projects, amongst other things. And in the
That's exactly the idea.
And is this scalable? Will this work for more and more people, or do we need governments to supply some of the funding in the future?
That's a tricky question. Well, government definitely should be involved because, for instance, one of the problems that we face nowadays is how can the students sustain themselves? Since we are not an accredited education, because we are nothing close to what the Dutch law considers an education, the students are not eligible for what we call here the students' financiering, so that the students' financial help. So we have to, well, we're helping them ourselves. We have this assistance program. The Stiating has a special fund for that. But that's something that should not be on our hand. I think the government should take their responsibility and sustain the students, help them, obviously within the frame, within the legislation. And as of today, the only thing I'm asking is that my students are considered students by the government. That's for one part. Now, when it comes to actually funding the programs and so on, eventually, I hope that's what we mentioned earlier about 2930, the governments will be involved. They have to, because the initiative comes from the private sector, and that's great. I believe the private sector is really good for innovation and having new ideas, implementing it, running pilots. But we need to institutionalize it a bit so it can be really sustainable and work in the long run. That, yeah, hopefully that will be the case. I hope the governments will wake up and try to implement something.
David, you've been very generous with your time. We're almost coming to the end of the discussion. Just one last question I wanted to pass you away is, to what extent is this method dependent on actually being a physical gathering spot? Could this be taught online by people staying in their own communities or in their own homes, or is it necessary to bring people together into the physical buildings?
This is a really relevant question, and the answer is straight. People have to come here to do the education. We are in no way an online education. It's really trendy nowadays with MOOCs and this kind of initiatives. And I have nothing against these. I think they are really valuable and useful, but that's not what we're doing here. I want to make sure that my students are actual social beings, okay? I want to get rid of the stereotype of the nerd programmer just dwelling in the basement of his parents. And so that's something that is not true anymore. I want to get rid of that. I want my students to be able to interact with each other in a perfectly good way and healthy way, and become some perfectly and healthy collaborators in a company, to be able to interact in a team, to be an actual social being. And for me, it is impossible to achieve that goal if we do not have the people on site. The building has been designed carefully to offer some leisure space, we have a pantry, we have showers even. The place has really been designed so it's welcoming and warm. To give you an idea, about a third of the building is dedicated to learning facilities, and the two other thirds are just random spaces that the students can use to spend time here. I expect my students to spend around 60 hours a week in my building. So it's not 60 hours a week working in front of the computer. That would be unhealthy. No, but I want them to be here to socialize, to just enjoy the time being together, because eventually this community is what we have the most valuable. Because right now they are students, but in 5 to 10 years from now, they will be alumni and they will have a career. And having this network of people that is still tight, it will help them tremendously, especially if the community is really healthy and helpful. So now I believe that this kind of education have to pass through an actual place, to be in an actual physical site.
And 60 hours a week roughly in the building, is that all year round, or are there terms with holiday periods in between?
No, it's whole year round. The students are in charge of their own holidays. There are no times in the year when it's holidays and the students leave. It's up to them. It's actually fairly close to what you would experience in an actual company. If you want to take a week off, well, you just discuss with your coworkers first if it's fine by them. Then you go to your manager if it's fine by that person as well, and you're good.
Any final thoughts? Anything you would like to say that we haven't had a chance to explore?
I would say that when it comes to education, we have to dare. I know that it can be a sensitive topic because we are talking about the education of actual people, and there is little room for failure when it comes to education. But still, there should be room and frame for new education initiatives to appear, bloom, and thrive, so we can bring new ideas to the table. I strongly believe that there is not one definitive answer to education. That's something that is ever going, that heavily depends on the population you're talking about the era you're talking about. I think education in the 50s and in the thousands and then in 50 years from now will be radically different. So it's really important to be adaptable, to be flexible, to remain relevant and embrace change instead of trying to resist it. So yeah, that would be my final word. We need to dare, and we need to make room for initiative and thinking and designing new educational models. There is not one definitive answer. It's an ever-going problem.
So we have to be able to dare. We have to be able to explore and actually try bold new initiatives. There won't just be one new way of doing education. There might be multiple ways of doing education. If people are watching this video before Sunday, the 1st of December, you might like to find London Futurists online. We're having at 9 o'clock UK time in the evening, 1 hour online discussion on various models for the future of education, of which many of the ideas we've heard in this last discussion, I'm sure, will be featuring. David Giron, you've been a fascinating source of ideas. Thank you very much for being a guest with London Futurists.
Thank you very much for having me, David. I wish you a nice day.